Have you noticed in recent days there's been a little bit of an uptick in the embrace of conspiracy theories? Of course, there have always been some of these ideas that have kind of gotten ground, and it's sad, of course, when some of the conspiracy theories turn out to be true, because then the other ones that haven't been proved yet, we say, well, just got to wait until that one is proven. But it seems like today there are on both sides of the political aisle, both sides, Christian, non-Christian, this embrace of conspiracy theories. And I think it's when I say conspiracy theory, I mean that there's this idea that there are these people out there kind of pulling the strings and making things happen, and that are kind of controlling things. And it's so prevalent, I think, first of all, because there's a desire to make excuses why things haven't gone the way that we want. I was kind of hoping that this is the way life is, and it didn't happen. It must be that someone was kind of out to get me and kind of ruin the things that I had. There's also probably a frustration with the many, many inequities that we find in life that we'd like changed. It's just not fair. A lot of people say, oh, this system is just against me. And if the system were different, if it weren't for these people that are kind of wrecking my life, things would be very different and I could have a better life. There's also a realization that there are powerful people that don't have my best interest in mind. And I think one of the reasons that people love Donald Trump is they felt like he was one of those powerful people that he was going to look after us. And there's something about that it's not just an embrace of someone like Donald Trump, but I want someone who's in my corner, because I know that there are people who don't have my best interest at heart. And so we understand that. It's a lot easier to blame some faceless cabal of dark-roomed villains than it is sometimes to face life as it is. And so when we think about, again, some of the inequities in life and how maybe unfair it is, there's always this temptation to go after these people. But even if those people exist, and I'm not saying they are, and I'm not saying they don't necessarily, in certain contexts, of course, there are people that are powerful and that don't have my best interest in mind. Of course, there are. But when we as Christians think about those types of people and those types of things, we understand first and foremost that there is a greater power than those. We're not afraid of, if there are people pulling the strings, we know that there is someone even above them. And that brings us a lot of comfort. In 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 13, Peter says, "Who is he that will harm you if you be followers of that which is good?" He wrote that to people that he knew would be captured by some of the Roman authorities and killed, asking, who can harm you if you're followers of that which is good? Ultimately, your fate is in God's hand. Isn't that a good place to be? Cabals notwithstanding, isn't it great to be in the hand of a sovereign, almighty God? Romans chapter 8, verse 34, Paul says, "Who is he that condemneth? It is Christ that died, yea, rather that is risen again, who is even at the right hand of God, who also maketh intercession for us." That's a wonderful thing to think about. Yes, there are people who have my harm in mind, but there's also a Savior who became God, becoming flesh, and now is at the right hand of the Father, making intercession for me. That's a wonderful thing. We who understand that God is sovereign, we understand he's sovereign over everything, and that there is nothing outside of his control, and that there's nothing that happens that we could say, oops, God messed this one up, or oops, God didn't know that was going to happen, or, oh, if only God had known about this, he could have changed this. That is never, ever the case. God is not only powerful, but we understand he also has a will. He has desires that he can and will make happen. So James is writing to these people that have sort of forgotten that. They're acting a little bit like there is no God. I'm not talking about the people he's writing to generally, but in this section of James, he's writing to people who have forgotten that there is a God who is above them, and that there's a God who cares about the way that they live their life. There's a God who cares about their values and about the way that they live and the way they treat other people. And he's trying to tell them, you need to understand that it's not just you and the world and the system. There's a God that's involved in this as well. And he calls them out twice. Notice in verse 13, go to now. In chapter 5, verse 1, go to now. Those are the only two times that phrase, it's a two-word phrase in the Greek. Only time that those two words show up. And it means, hey, listen, essentially. Hey, pay attention. Yeah, you've gotten way off, and now it's time to kind of get back to the center and find out what's up. So he calls their attention to this problem. And it's mostly those who are rich and feel that their money gives them some kind of special power. Now, you might be saying, well, Pastor, most of these sermons have been very applicable to me. When you talk about wisdom, we all need that and everything. But I'm not one of these wealthy people that he's talking about here in James chapter 4 and 5. That's just not me. I'd love to find out what rich people problems are, but I'm sadly probably never going to. And so this isn't for me. Well, I'll just remind you that we live in the wealthiest country at the wealthiest time in human history. That we can do things that no one has ever been able to do, that we enjoy more comforts and more health and more help than any other people in world history. So yes, we're all very wealthy compared to so much of the way the world has lived. It's just that we often look at other people and say, well, I'm not that wealthy, and so things are different. But let's just bring us to the point where we understand that in our affluence in America, and I'm thankful for it, all right? I'm not even casting stones at all the comfort and the wealth that we get to live in. But as we live in it, we forget what it's like. We sort of think of it as just kind of owed to us. And that's the mentality that James is attacking. People that live in comfort become very soft and entitled. And you may not feel like you are living very well off. But you're here in a warm building, and you got here probably in a car that that was comfortable, and you're probably going to go to sleep tonight in relative safety, not just from our borders, but in your own home. And so, yes, you're very well off, and James has something to say to you as well. What he is going to call them to is to reorient themselves to not depending on their wealth and not using their wealth in wrong ways, but to put at paramount and the number one, God's will. What does God want for my life? What does God have for me? And if you'll make that preeminent, all the other things have to fall under that. But if you will instead make things that are not God a bigger priority and a motivation for you, you know what the Bible calls that? An idol. And God, just as he said in verse number 6, he will resist the proud and giveth grace to the humble. He will resist your idols and bring you to the point where you are fully dependent on him and his will. And it is better for you to do that in your own heart than to bring God's discipline on you for that. So let me give you some thoughts about God's will. First of all, you need to recognize the will of God in your future planning. Notice chapter 4, verses 13 through 17. I'll read it for you, and then we'll look at it. Go to now, ye that say, today or tomorrow we will go into such a city, and continue there a year, and buy and sell, and get gain. Whereas ye know not what shall be on the morrow. For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appeareth for a little time, and then vanisheth away. For that ye ought to say, if the Lord will, we shall live, and do this or that. But now ye rejoice in your boastings. All such rejoicing is evil. Therefore, to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. Verse number 3 describes the business model of these business owners who want to try to live independently. And it's a very normal business model. Hey, we could go to this other city where they don't have this product, and we're going to buy and sell. That's just one word that means we're going to make merchandise. We're going to buy maybe raw products, and we're going to turn it into something, and we have the know-how how to do that, or we know we have the networks to bring in these kind of products, and all we have to do is distribute, and so we're going to somehow make a business in this city, and we have a plan. We're going to do that for about a year, and then our whole hope is that we will somehow make a profit. Is there anything wrong with starting a business and making a profit? No. I mean, even Proverbs 31 talks about the virtuous woman who considers a vineyard and buys it. She makes clothing and she does all these things. She's very industrious. The Bible commends that. There's nothing wrong with that. There are very wealthy, industrious, hardworking people in the Bible that were godly people. Abraham, Job, David, godly people who were good businessmen. And we need businessmen who want to do the right thing. But he reminds them in verse number 4 that life is short and that they don't know what's going to happen. And it's one thing to say, I hope this will happen, or I plan on this happening. It's another thing to say, this is what we have to do. This is what we're going to do. So he says in verse number 14, whereas ye know not what shall be on the morrow. For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appeareth for a little time and then vanisheth away. He reminds them life is short. Life is vapor. It may disappear very quickly. Then what? Right? You've heard the saying, he who dies with the most toys wins. The phrase I always saw on witness wear t-shirts growing up is, he who dies with the most toys still dies. And you don't get to take any of those toys with you. So he's just saying, all of this that you're working for may disappear. Now, none of us live as if we might die later. Like, you didn't sell everything before you came to church knowing that you'll never see all those things again, and you wanted to put all that money in the offering plate or something. You have a right and an ability to live on your own and to live comfortably. Nothing wrong with that. The problem is not having stuff, starting businesses. It's the presumption that I get to do this for as long as I want to, with no relation at all to what God might want. To live for tomorrow is to take what has not been given to you, is to take a promise that God has not made and saying, this is mine. And I think that's why we meet a lot of people that are very bitter, because they're upset about what they were promised, what they thought they were promised, but they never were. They are so upset that I have a right to this. Everyone else does. Whatever it is, when there's a death in the family, it's all the future that's been robbed from me. That's the sadness that comes. All the things that we could have done, all the memories we could have done. And I feel for you and I understand you, but those things were never promised to you. And to be bitter because you felt like they were yours when they haven't materialized is wrong. So in Proverbs chapter 27, verse 1, boast not thyself of tomorrow, for thou knowest not what a day may bring forth. He says in verse number 16, not just that this boasting of the future is wrong-headed, but that it's evil. And so we need to put it in its proper perspective. Now, we understand that there's very little control that we have in life. Imagine, all right, I'm just going to go to the store for something quick. You get in your car, and as you're leaving the garage, you scrape the mirror against your door. That's frustrating. You're driving out, and all of a sudden there's somebody that just comes across and almost cuts you off. And, I'm frustrated now, and I'm driving. And it seems like every slow driver is right in front of me. And what I thought was going to be a quick drive to the store takes me, 15 minutes just to get to the place I'm trying to get. And you get there, and there's no parking spots up front. And so now you have to park all the way back, and you get out. And as you get out of the car, you slip on the ice, and you're so frustrated. And you go in, and there are no carts left. And you're, okay, fine, I'll just carry all this stuff. You go in, and you think you can find an employee that can help you find the thing you're looking for. And it's like they've all gone on break, or they're all avoiding you. Finally, you find one, and they seem really annoyed to help you. But you finally say, I'm looking for this. And they tell you, I think we have those. And they take you to the wrong place. No, I'm looking for this. So you take you to another place. No, I'm looking for this. Oh, I think that's over in this aisle. So you finally get to the aisle where it is, and they're all out. You say, forget it. And you get back in your car, and you slip on the ice as you're getting into it, and you go through the parking lot, and there are people that are slow. You have to wait for them as they're going across the parking lot. Finally, you get all the way home, and you have nothing to show for it. And you say, yes, welcome to my life. You've just described, my most frustrating dream. We take that, and we realize there is very little control we have over so much in life. We want to think that we have control and it's going to be just like this and that, and it is just not. There are so many factors standing in your way. And so in recognizing that on a micro level, understand that on a macro level as well. Think back to a time in your life where you really felt out of control, where you really felt like, I am not in control of my life. I am barely hanging on for the ride. And those are frustrating times, I think, because we assume that there ought to be or there should be some kind of control. Why do you assume that things just should be the way that you want them? I think there's a certain arrogance there. But if we'll reorient our idea and not just say, I expect this or I demand this, but I hope for this. Notice he says, not that it's wrong to do business, but he says in verse 15 that ye ought to say, if the Lord will, we shall live and do this or that. Nothing wrong with starting a business, but it's everything right with saying, God, we want you to bless this and we want you to be in this. And Lord, whatever you want for us, that's what we want. If you want us to do well in our business that we have, that we can give to others, or that we can make a profit and live comfortably, then that's what we want. And if it's not your will for us to be here, we'd rather know that so we don't lose everything that we've put into this. So it's important for us to understand that. Now you might say, well, does that mean that God controls everything? No, I think we have to understand that God gives agency to mankind. There is such a thing as, I would say free will, but I feel like free will is such a misnomer because it's not exactly free. We understand that every decision that everyone makes is in some part tainted by sin. All of us have things that we know to do right and things that we want to do that aren't always right. And though we have the choice, we also understand that we have a bent to do the wrong thing. But let's not pretend that God has no control. Even as he's given us a free will, even if he's given us a will of choice and agency, he also has control over that as well. Now, God doesn't ever make anyone do anything that they don't want to do, but he has ways of getting us to that point anyway. So at the end of the book of Genesis, Joseph's, when he's talking with his brothers, and his brothers are worried that now that dad's dead, Joseph's going to say, so about that pit, they're all worried about this. And so they said, oh, but dad said that he'd like you to forgive us before he died. Could you do that? This is dear old dad's dying wish that you would just forget all those nasty things that we said and did to you. And remember, Joseph's reply is, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. I see God's hand in all of this. Now, isn't that a strange thing to think about? These 11 men or these 10 men doing evil to Joseph, and yet God being in all of it. He says, yes, I'll allow that. Yes, I'll allow that. He still stopped some of the things, right? Like Potiphar, there's no reason why Potiphar didn't just have Joseph killed, except that God's hand was upon him. Right? There's no reason why this butler waited 2 whole years, except he just forgot, and God allowed him to forget until there was a time where he was needed to bring Joseph out of the prison. So we know that even as we all have agency and free choice, God's also in this. And that's where we say, God, I'm glad that you're absolutely sovereign. It says it this way in Proverbs chapter 16, verse 9. A man's heart deviseth his way, but the Lord directeth his steps. You make whatever choice you want, and as long as you're submitted to God's will, he's in it, and he's moving, and he's going to help you, and he can protect you. And so even in this is a reorientation from I'm going to do what I want to do to, all right, God, what is it that you have for me? So our response is, first of all, to completely submit ourselves to him. Lord, whatever you want. If the Lord wills, we will do this, we will do this, we will do this. It's to completely trust him to do or stop whatever he sees as good, and to not hang on to everything as if we are owed it. To live a life ready to be helped or stopped by his will. Now, if you know that this is the way that it is, that God says, I have a plan for you, I have purpose for you, I am working in your life. If you know that, and you still insist on doing things your way and getting upset when things don't go your way, then what verse number 17 says is this: therefore, to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. You maybe don't think of being submitted to God's will and being totally open-handed with your life. You don't think of that as a sin. You think of that as like another tier of the Christian life. But that's not what this verse says. If you are fighting against God and his purposes and his will for your life, either because you've never asked him or because you know what he wants and you're saying, I don't think I want to do that, that is sin. That is sin. It's just as wicked as anything that anybody at any prison has done in the eyes of God, because you are fighting and resisting God. And let me just encourage you this morning to totally recognize the sovereignty of God and his will for your life. It will not be as bad as you think it will be. Satan has you thinking that God's going to destroy your life, and that is not the God of the Bible. He loves you. He's a father who wants good things for you if you will submit to his good and perfect will. The second principle that we take is to submit to the will of God in your values. Notice in chapter 5, verse 1, go to now, ye rich men, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver is cankered. The rust of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. Ye have heaped treasure together for the last days. Many commentators think that this isn't talking to Christian people in the church. It's talking to unbelievers outside the church. I don't know what I think about that, because it seems a very strange thing for James to be standing on the street corner saying this. I think that this idea is even among Christians. If there's a man in the church in Corinth who is having an affair with his father's wife, and if people in Corinth were suing one another, then probably there were people in these churches that James is writing to who were using their wealth and their riches to suppress other people, and they were using their wealth to promote only themselves. He tells them to turn from trusting their riches. He warns them that in verse number 1 that miseries will come upon them, that eventually that will all fade away, because riches are temporary. And I don't think it's necessarily even that God is saying, I'm going to take it all away from you, but just to say, why would you build your whole life and being and purpose on something that is fundamentally temporary? Why would you do that? In Proverbs 23, verse 5, wilt thou set thine eyes upon that which is not? For riches certainly make themselves wings. They fly away as an eagle toward heaven. You've heard the phrase money talks? It sure does. It says goodbye. That's what we know about money, right? You get it and it's gone. And you have a budget and you say, man, I got paid. And you know where every dollar of that is going. Now, if you're a young person and you're putting that money away in savings, enjoy those years. That's so wonderful that you can put so much away and that your parents are helping that. And they want to help you in your life and everything. So that's a wonderful thing to have that. But just understand money is temporary. And one day you're going to have to spend that money on something that you're going to need. And hopefully it'll be a good investment. All that. Just know that it's all temporary. Why would you put your whole being and life into something that isn't going to last, either in this world or especially in the next? Proverbs 21, verse 17 says, he that loveth pleasure shall be a poor man. He that loveth wine and oil shall not be rich. You think, well, if you love the nicer things in life, you'll get to enjoy life. And Proverbs says, yeah, probably for a little while, and then you'll be poor. You cannot sustain a luxury lifestyle for long. He reminds them they've put too much dependence on their riches. Now, we experience this in our own life, too. If you were unwise enough to take $1,000 20 years ago and stick it under your mattress, this money is safe here. I'm going to put $1,000 under my mattress. 20 years ago, you pull it out now, you know what that $1,000 can buy? Much, much less. That isn't a good strategy, because money is always just changing. We watch the stock market go up and down. For those people who 30, 40 years ago, we're buying Beanie Babies, thinking that's going to be the thing, that's going to be my retirement, that's going to be the thing that this is going to save my life. I'm going to have all these things. And I was given back in 1993 or 94 some little micro machines, and they happened to be like one was a Star Wars and one was a Star Trek, and I thought, these are going to be worth something someday. So I didn't even open them as a little kid. So I just kind of put them in a box. And recently we moved into our house. I'm like, I don't need all these boxes of memorabilia. So I'm going through it. I'm like, oh, I forgot about these micro machines. I'll put them on eBay. Well, I put them on there for $15 a piece, and they still have not sold. Nobody wants them. I thought, man, I'm going to make $100 off these things. Maybe I might get $20 and I'll take one of you out to the Good Life or something. I don't know, but it's not going to be much. It's not going to be much. And we think, oh, this is going to be this great thing. And then we just realize how temporary money is and how transitory all these ideas that we have is. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't try to do our best to save and invest and do what we can. I'll understand all of that, but just understand that God's a part of that too, that God has a will for the way that you use your money and the way that you think about your money. Money is a wonderful servant and a lousy master, and it's just important for us to understand that. Now, what is God's will for me regarding my values? I would say that God has better purposes for you than acquiring wealth and amassing a fortune. There's nothing wrong with being comfortable. There's nothing wrong with being a successful business person. But understand that this is a universal truth that money corrupts. And the things that money can do corrupt. And if you think you'll be immune to that, you probably will not. There are people that have been able to, with a Christ-like spirit, be a master over money and to use their money for good. But those people are very, very few. What it takes is putting first things first and saying, this is uppermost, this is most important. Jesus talked about valuing his kingdom first. Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 20. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. There you can put whatever you want into this life, and it may all go away. And what he says here, your riches are corrupted, your garments are moth-eaten, everything is temporary. Everything corrupts, everything goes away. But the treasures that you could put into heaven, if you could turn that, again, we always talk about how can I turn this into something more valuable. If you can take your life, and that's not just your money, but your talents, your time, your resources, whatever it is, how can you, your relationships, how can I turn that into something more eternal? How can I change this into a product that's going to help for eternity, that's going to glorify God and is going to be treasure in heaven? And if that is not your uppermost, if that is not your primary, how can I glorify God in the things that I have and the things that I do in my relationships? If that is not uppermost, then James calls you to examine yourself. And it's not just the rich that are doing this. So when we talk about people that are in higher ups and they do all these things because they don't have my best interest at heart, or they're meeting in back rooms and all that, they have a system of thought. They have a system of value that is not just not godly, but it's against godliness. And we all say, I wish those people would fall in their designs. And sometimes, once in a while, we get to see people who do that very thing, that had all these schemes. You know, the Bernie Madoffs and the Harvey Weinsteins and all the people that were trying to do all this for themselves. And it's kind of fun to watch them fall. And we understand that one day all of that's going to fall. So if that's true, and we say we rejoice in that day when all the wickedness will be revealed, I don't want to be a part of that system. I don't want to be a part of that. I want to be someone who stands and God says, you understood that my kingdom was more important than the kingdom of this world, and you didn't buy in. And for that, I'm going to reward you. And look at all that what I was able to do through your life. If that doesn't sound important to you, then this is a gut check for you. This is a heart check for you. If you'd say, yeah, but that's all invisible. That's all out there. I don't know anything about that. I don't know what that day is going to be like. Listen, I can't give you specifics. I just know it's something to strive for. I just know it's something. And if you aren't sure where you are on that spectrum, let me ask you this. What is that thing that if it was taken away, you'd be angry at God? What is the thing that if God took it away from you, you would be angry and bitter at him? If you have something in your mind, that is the thing that God wants you to give to him. Now, you say, well, for me, it's like my family. Okay, yeah, that's for me too. But I had to come to a point maybe 10 years ago where I realized I was very much in danger of making my family an idol. I was so worried. I'd be up all night just thinking about what if something happened to my family? What if all these things? And I just had to say, God, I can't live like this. Like, I don't think it's your will for me to cling on to my family as the most important thing. And I realized that I would be really angry and bitter at God if he took these things away. And so I had to come to the point where I said, God, this is all yours. This is all yours to do with whatever you want. Now, if something happened to things that are important in my life, our house, my family, whatever it is, I don't really care about our cars, but some of you do, and whatever. If God took all that away, I wouldn't be happy necessarily, especially I've got to figure something out now. But at least understanding the will of God and his sovereignty, I would trust him to know this was not a good thing for me to have. This was not a good thing, a path for me to be on. And I'm trusting that God knows what he's doing. It's submitting to the will of God in my values and not just my things. So are you valuing his will and his purposes above everything else? Are you wanting to be used as a vessel to show his importance? Or has it all been about showing others how important I am? In Ephesians chapter 4, verse 28, it says, let him that stole steal no more. And we say, yeah, that's right. You shouldn't steal. But it goes on to say, but rather let him labor, working with his hands the thing which is good, that he may have to give to him that needeth. It's not just don't steal, but work. Why work? So that you can have, so that you can give to those who need, so that you can glorify God. The first principle is recognizing the will of God in your future planning. The second principle is submitting to the will of God in your values. And the third principle is fearing the will of God in your treatment of others. So that God's will is not just a plan for your life. That's part of it. But a part of it is what God wants. And what God wants, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And if there's something that you want that would make it so that you are disobeying those two commands, then that is something that God's going to, what he says again in chapter 4, verse 6, resist. Notice verse number 4, behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth. And the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. Ye have lived in pleasure on the earth and have been wanton. Ye have nourished your hearts as in the day of slaughter. Ye have condemned and killed the just, and he doth not resist you. James rebukes these men for mistreatment of others, especially those who had been working in their fields. They had hired these laborers, they reaped down their fields, and they didn't pay them. They were living instead for themselves. And those poor people cried out to God, and God is the Lord of Sabaoth. Now, until this week, I thought Sabaoth was just like the Sabbath, and I didn't really understand what the Sabbath had to do with any of this. But the word Sabaoth is the Lord of hosts, which is God's term in the Old Testament for he's not happy and he has an army and he's going to bring judgment. Okay? The Lord of hosts, the Lord of angels, all the armies of heaven, that's the Lord that is going to avenge these poor people. So that puts things in a little different perspective. They will be punished if they don't do right. So Psalm 140, verse 12, I know that the Lord will maintain the cause of the afflicted and the right of the poor. And Proverbs 21:13, whoso stoppeth his ears at the cry of the poor, he also shall cry himself, but shall not be heard. For those of us who use our wealth to oppress others and who don't take on the help and comfort of others, God says that is not right either. You should fear the will of God in your treatment of others. Now, there are many people, we understand, who live with no reference to others, only themselves. And sometimes we get angry at rich people who just kind of live their lives like there's nobody else on the planet. And maybe you get upset when you think about all the good that a rich person could do with all their wealth. And you say, why aren't they doing it? But the question comes right back to the person in your mirror. Why aren't you doing anything with the things that you have? And I'm sorry if you think somehow that one day when you're rich, that's the day you'll use your money to do something good. No, if you're not doing it now when you have very little, you won't do it then when you have a lot. The lack of you doing good for someone has nothing to do with the money in your bank account. It has everything to do with your heart. And you should fear that God has given you good things to use for his glory, and you are not using it. Again, I'm talking about money because that's the context of the passage, but there are many different applications for the things that God's given you that you ought to use to glorify him and to do his will. And if you're not doing them, then you're not better than the people that were hiring all these people, promising to pay them, and then didn't. You think of yourself as very different than them, but James is saying, listen, this is all of us. We have things that we could use to do good for others, and we aren't doing it. We want companies who put profit before safety be held accountable. But what about us who put our own comfort above the comfort of others? We're glad that God keeps score and that he looks out for the poor. In Proverbs 22:16, he that oppresseth the poor to increase his riches, and he that giveth to the rich shall surely come to want. And we say, yes, that's right. They're going to get theirs. But what about me? What about you? Now you might say, listen, as long as I'm saved, it doesn't matter. And I hope that the gospel means so much to you, that you would understand what that means. You would understand that the gospel, the good news, means that Jesus Christ died on the cross for your sins. That if you recognize that you're a sinner, that you've done something to offend a holy God, then that he is angry at your sin. But at some point in your life, you came to know Jesus Christ as your personal Savior and to trust him, that what Jesus did on the cross, he did for you, and to exchange your sin for his righteousness so that you could have the righteousness of God and get to heaven. If you've accepted that free gift of salvation, what a wonderful thing. That is the beginning of life with God, not the end. Because God has greater things for you than that. We are made for this life more than just living and getting to heaven when we die. There is a sense in which God gets what he wants. In verse number 6, ye have condemned and killed the just, and he doth not resist you. The poor can't do anything about what the rich do against them. They have no means of doing it. The big companies have lawyers, and if you tried to sue them, you're going to lose. We all understand that, and that's frustrating to them. But what he says here is that God will be the one who comes after those who are oppressing the poor. He is a defender of those who need him. And again, in Proverbs chapter 22, verses 22 and 23, rob not the poor because he is poor, neither oppress the afflicted in the gate, for the Lord will plead their cause and spoil the soul of those that spoiled them. For us, as Christians, we understand that God's will is to use us to be a blessing and to be a help to others. Our lives are not to be lived however we want, when we know that there are other people who have needs. And whether that is, again, a use of your time to call somebody. I know that you have a lot of things that you want to do with your time. There are shows to watch. There are phones to scroll. There are feet to be put up in front of the fire. And I hope that you all have time for those things. That's wonderful. There are also people that have real needs, and they could use a phone call. They could use a card. They could use a visit. They could use a gift. They could use a talent that you have. They could use some of the things that you have to give, that God's given you as a steward to be able to see God in a different way, if you will use them. Our lives are not to be just be lived however we want. And again, I'm not just talking about money. I'm talking about all of life. So it tells us in Proverbs chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. It is a whole life on the altar, and when we pass the plate, it almost seems too small. I understand that First Baptist Church at some point had a huge offering plate, big enough for a person to get into it. And there was a call to say, God, everything I have, my past, my future, everything I have is yours. And to get on that altar, get in that offering plate and say, yes, Lord, I can give you a little bit of my money. I can give you 10% of what I have. But Lord, what you really want is all of me, all of my time, all of my resources, all of the abilities that you've given me, God, all of it for your honor and glory. And as we think about God's will, then we need to understand that it is God's will to use you and everything he's given you to glorify and honor himself. And to refuse to do that is not just you're missing out, but it is sin. When we understand the seriousness of this, hopefully then, as we have a time of invitation, you would understand the great need that God is calling you to.